In this modern age, technology has become an invaluable tool for making everyday tasks easier and more efficient. But with the rise of technology, there's a growing concern among creatives about the impact of artificial intelligence on fields like writing and creativity. Tonight, you've joined us for an enlightening panel discussion presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation as we explore the world of artificial intelligence and its implications on creativity. Our moderator for the evening is Dr. Kim Williams-Pulfer, who will guide us through this thought-provoking conversation with our expert panel. Let's meet our panelists. First, we have Carlos Birdsong, a multifaceted IT professional with over 20 years of experience. He's a computer science graduate and an Army veteran holding industry certifications from Microsoft and Amazon. But he's more than just a tech expert. Carlos is a full-time homeschool parent who blends technology with education, blogging about tech and homeschooling. He's the creator of unschoolai.com, a platform that leverages AI for interest-based learning. He's also beta testing homeschoolcoach.ai, a service that custom tailors lessons based on child's interests. Carlos' passion for social impact is evident as he consults with nonprofits to improve their mission through technology. Next, we have Jasmine E. McNealy, an attorney, critical public interest technologist, and social scientist. She's a senior fellow in tech policy with the Mozilla Foundation, a tenured professor at the University of Florida, and a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Jasmine's expertise lies in studying media and technology with a focus on influencing law and policy, privacy, surveillance, and data governance. She recently served as a technology advisor for the U.S. Federal Trade Commission and is the founder of the Alveary LLC. Last but not least, we have Rashad Grove, a journalist based in Princeton, New Jersey. Rashad covers a wide range of topics from TV and film to music, politics, sports, and pop culture, with a particular emphasis on Black culture. His work has been featured in prestigious publications like Ebony Magazine, Billboard, MTV News, Forbes, and many others. With degrees in African American Studies and Theology, Rashad is a staff writer at BET, contributing to multi-facets of the brand. And now a word about the Hurston Wright Foundation. Our mission is to honor, discover, and mentor Black writers by providing a supportive community and recognition of accomplishments. We offer in-person workshops and classes taught by award-winning authors to emerging and mid-career writers. Over 1,000 Black writers have taken our classes, increasing diversity in the cultural community. You have joined us tonight for a fascinating discussion on the intersection of AI and creativity as we explore how technology is changing the landscape of our world for better or for worse. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your patience. I want to welcome everyone to our panel this evening. I promise you we're still going to have a wonderful, wonderful conversation and discussion. During our virtual panel titled Securing the Black Voice in the Age of AI, our amazing panelists will discuss the rise of AI during this period of rapid technological transformation, which has served as a topic of discussion around its possibilities as well moments of concern among creatives. In particular, these issues include the possible erasure of the work of writers and other creatives, as well as the possibility for new opportunities that come with these transformations in tech. Our panel members today each bring a diverse range of knowledge on artificial intelligence, and they range from research, business, journalism, tech, and education, and will lead our conversation to help us deepen our knowledge on trends related to creativity, ethics, content, writers, and of course, AI. And I want to thank our panelists again, Carlos Birdsong, Dr. Jasmine E. McNealy, and Rashad Grove for being here. And I am your moderator, Kim Williams-Pulfer. So let's get started. Let's jump right in. And before I begin my first question, I just want to say that we will have a panel discussion first, and then we will open it up for audience questions at the second half of our conversation. So, but feel free to place your questions in the chat as they arise, because we'll have a moment to get into those as well. So let's start with Dr. McNealy. Thank you so much for joining us. Give us some background around this idea of artificial intelligence, because I think it's a bit of a catch-all term for a lot of different things. And so for the writers here who are here tonight, we love stories and we love context. Give us some of that foundation, that background story on what is AI and why, as writers, we need to know about it.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Williams-Pulfer, and thank you to Hurston Wright for inviting me to be on this panel. It's a very important topic we're talking about. When we talk about AI, what we say and what we actually mean are kind of two different things, right? So AI, or the field of artificial intelligence, has been around since around the Cold War. So the 1950s, it really got started as a field. And there's been like AI winters, meaning there wasn't a whole lot of government attention and funding and research in the area. And then there's been AI springs when there was a lot of government attention. And then also now we think about a whole lot of corporate attention and funding being placed into artificial intelligence. But in general, artificial intelligence is a catch-all term. And it basically is, how can we get programs, machines to automate and simulate human intelligence? How can we get machines to make the kinds of decisions and provide the kinds of guidance that we need as humans, but do it in an efficient way, a more accurate way, a faster way, and have more objectivity than we normal humans would have. And this is based on decisions. These decisions are based on data that is historic. All data is historic, but old data, but also real-time data that some of the systems are collecting at the same time it's giving you the results. So those recommendation systems that we use, so the Netflix, the Spotify, the Apple Music, or whatever, that's AI. It's automation. It's a recommender system. Based on the data you give it, it gives you something in return. But then also under AI is facial recognition. And that's based off of data as well. But it's very different than Netflix and Hulu and everything else. And then also falling under AI are things like autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars, as we call them. That's considered AI too. So it's a pretty wide swath of things that are automated that also provide us with guidance and recommendations for how we should proceed with certain things. But what we think it is, though, is Star Trek. What we think it is, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or for those of us who grew up in the 80s, Kit the car on Knight Rider, right? It's going to talk right back to us, and it's going to help us to make these really cool decisions. But that's not really how it works. There's always humans, or there should be humans, in the loop, in the background, so to speak, helping to make decisions, helping to parse the decisions, helping to say, you know what, it's really not a good decision that's based on bad data, or we're lacking in context. So in general, AI is a wide swath of tools that we use to help us make decisions about a whole lot of different things.
That's great. So AI is not data from Star Trek, right? It's a little bit different. I want to turn now to Rashad. Thank you for joining us. Talk a little bit. You do a lot of coverage, right? Talk about some of these benefits of AI. Give us some examples. And in particular, how is AI supporting Black communities, Black writers, either through philanthropy, nonprofits, government, or in the corporate world?
Woo! I got to write a dissertation tonight. Thank you to Hurston Wright Foundation, and thank you to all my esteemed colleagues tonight, panelists. Well, I'm interested in anything that furthers the thriving of Black people. So I'm not an expert at all, but I wrote several pieces about it and interviewed some folks, and I was very interested in learning how AI technology helps with racial bias in policing, and it helps with gender bias in hiring practice, because I'm committed to the thriving of Black women because I have three with me in my home. So I, I, my intentionality is always to figure out how can we progress as Black people without um, with taking the fear out of technology, and like Kit was Kit, some people wouldn't even get in that car in the 80s because Kit was talking, because we have this kind of risk averse thing with technology, and I'm going to play a part as a writer to kind of demystify uh, the boogeyman of technology and AI. Because in our home we use Alexa AI. We have younger kids who've embraced the technology, who wouldn't know what to do without this kind of tech. And I think as writers, if we can grasp this, maybe we can be even more productive and really make some moves to really push the agenda of Black people forward.
That's great. Thinking about writers and productivity, and thinking about what Black communities need and how AI can support us. Carlos, are you there? I want to transition to you and to your work. Tell us about how AI is supporting your content and your creativity and your creative work. Maybe what you want to do is kind of meld this amazing background in IT as well as this really interesting journey into homeschooling. Talk just really briefly about how those two worlds, have collided or intersected, and how AI is helping you in both of those spaces or across both of those spaces.
Hi, I really am appreciative of being here tonight, so I really appreciate that. I think that my journey is a little weird, but I've been in IT for the last 20 years and working for a consulting company, and really kind of what I've do since I've kind of worked all the different areas in just system supports and networking and training and things like that really has to do with automation and kind of how to do more with less. That's kind of where my wheelhouse is when it comes to tech. Um, when the pandemic started, my wife and I decided to just pull our kids out of public school and homeschool. One of the beginning mistakes that we made was trying to teach our children everything. So that didn't go over very well. Um, as we learn how to be better homeschool parents, we learn this idea of unschooling, which is a concept that you take subjects that you want your children to learn and you tailor them toward their interests. It makes it more engaging, it makes it more impactful, but it's not really easy to do, to kind of sustain that kind of energy to keep doing it. And so last year, I started using ChatGPT to kind of help me with some of those things, to help me create lessons and activities. And so what happens is I started creating tools for us, and then I started sharing those tools with some of the groups, homeschooling groups that I belong to. In my day job, I am really responsible for knowledge management and for processes and procedures and things like that, making sure that those things are documented. And I saw the possibilities that something specific like an AI chatbot could do to support the team that I'm on. It'd be a helpful tool that would support the work that we do and get us answers quickly, and really support internal processes in the company. Because we didn't have access to those tools on an enterprise level, I decided to do the next best thing, which was create a tool like that for homeschooling parents. And so with the groups that I belong to, the parents really give a lot of information to each other. So it's really reliable and it's shared experiences. But the problem is that when you're someone new kind of coming into that group, you don't really know where to go and how to find that information that's specific to your problem. It's great that parents make themselves available to answer those kinds of questions. But when I found that an AI chatbot can do that as well. And so that's what I built and to share with the group to kind of do that. One thing about when we talk about AI and the future of AI is that I know that there are problems, and that AI, when we talk about things like LLMs, large language models, that they're based on data sets. And these data sets are large, but they're also very biased because they're Western and affluent and majority culture and things like that. But despite these deep flaws, I think that we need to use these tools, because what happens is the more we use them, the more we can find the problems and make other people aware of those problems and then actually create solutions for them to move forward.
That's great. I think, two things you said there. Rashad talked about the importance of using it in our communities, and you give this really tangible example of how that plays out and how you're helping with this unschooling movement. But you also raised this other issue, which will, be my second question for Dr. McNealy, which is around this idea of bias and discrimination. And unfortunately, we do have to talk about some of the pitfalls about AI, even though there's a lot of exciting things going on. And I want to ask you, Dr. McNealy, about certain issues of racism and discrimination. And I'm going to quote Dr. Ruha Benjamin from her book, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Codes for the New Jim Code. Really good book, everyone should pick up, released in 2019, where she introduces the term the New Jim Code. And she defines the New Jim Code as, quote, the employment of new technologies that reflect and reproduce existing inequities, but that are promoted and perceived as more objective than the discriminatory systems of the previous era. And what strikes me is her recognition that while tech is discriminatory, it is promoted as neutral in everyday life. And I think you mentioned this at the top of our time together, Dr. McNealy, is this idea that there should always be a human behind these AI systems. However, what I think she's trying to say that there is some level of bias. Talk to us a little bit about what that is and what some of the real life impacts of this new Jim Code.
Yeah, so as Mr. Bertong mentioned, AI is based on data. It runs on data. It runs on huge amounts of data, and it models, or how it puts together the decisions that it's going to give you or going to make are based on data as well. But we know we have a problem with data, and that is even the junior researcher knows there's always bias in data. There's always bias in data. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing, but it means we have to be aware that there are blind spots. There are decisions that we make even before we start collecting data. There are systems that surround the data that have an effect on how that data will then be interpreted, and the things that will be missed, and the context that will be lacking. Data lacks context. And so when you have a system that is supposed to be neutral, but is based on data that it has compounded biases, what you're going to get as an output can very well be affected by the same kind of bias. And I would say also intensifying that bias that's already there in its foundation. And so that's what we have to be aware of. So data has to be placed in the proper context. We have to look at history. We have to look at the systems. We have to look at all different kinds of things that data touches. Data is just a snapshot, an observation at a particular point in time about a particular thing, but it has so many ramifications when it is interpreted. And so what that means is down the supply chain, bias comes along with the data and the interpretation. What that means is in every system that we use AI for, there can be bias. So it could be something that's kind of biased we don't really care about. So if we're on Spotify and there's some bias in the music that they recommend to us, we might say, whatever, it didn't get it quite right, or why is it giving me recommendations? But that's benign. But when it comes to things that are consequential, talking about our criminal justice system, we're talking about admissions school, we're talking about jobs and labor, we're talking about healthcare, the bias is really significant, right? Let me give you an example, because we're writers, we like stories, right? So quite frankly, there is not a week that doesn't go by when we don't hear a story about AI and some of the consequences of AI. Consequences that are both good and consequences that are negative. But this one, you have AI being used in the healthcare setting, and the idea was like, okay, we can use AI to help us make decisions about which communities need more money for care. And to do this, they said, okay, we're going to use healthcare spending data as a proxy for the acuteness of the care that's needed, or like how ill people are. And the more ill you are, we're going to give you more money. The problem is that sociologists and public health folks know that healthcare spending is not a good proxy for who's sick, because many times, many people who are sick don't spend money because they don't have the money to spend to get well. So you have a system, an AI system, an algorithmic system giving advice that is very biased based on the decisions made about what we should use as a proxy, what kind of data we should use to help make this decision. If we don't know the background of that data, we end up making very harmful decisions that disparately impact certain people and certain communities. And this is what we have to be aware of. Yes, there are some really good uses of artificial intelligence. We have to be aware, though, of the data that those systems are based on and how they might be used, and what we need to do to remedy, mitigate, or even stop those systems from giving us those disparate impacts.
No, that's great. So it's trying to think about what kinds of data are being fed into these AI systems. So Rashad, that makes me think maybe it made sense for Black people to say, if kid pulled up in front of my house, I might say, hold on, kid. I may not I may not want to take a ride with you because I don't know what you're working with, right? But I want to transition and talk a little bit about some of these pitfalls with AI, its role in limiting human creative production and dissemination, right? Because we're here to talk to writers and about what writers do. And I want to reference something that just happened in the news last month. So we all know, after a very long and protracted labor strike, very long negotiation process, the Hollywood Writers Guild of America approved an agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. So I read this in The Guardian, covered the story, and they noted that the agreement included some criteria for AI, right, and its use in Hollywood. The newspaper article said that these contract negotiations, especially around AI, could serve as a model for other industries and spaces. Can you talk a little bit about some of those specifics of that contract related to AI, and what are some of those aspects that might be helpful or useful for our audience as we start to think about regulation and how writers can kind of be at the vanguard of regulating and managing how AI is used?
Yeah, that piece about the writer's strike was fascinating because a negative impact of AI is the ability to hide data as well as reveal it. And when you think about how platforms like Netflix, they don't share the actual hard numbers. So you're already at a disadvantage as a creator, as a writer, as a producer, if you're on that platform, unless you have a big name. So when you think about the business of writing and how AI and automation plays an effect, it can help us be more productive, but how can we use this tool to make sure we're not losing revenue? And that was a big sticking point from the directors and the writers. How can we compute AI now? It's just not when we used to watch it, We Killing Kit Tonight. We used to watch Not Right on ABC, CBS, and NBC. That was it. Now there's so many there's a wide range of platforms, and whoever is behind the curtain, whoever it is, the wizard controls the narrative, controls the finances, controls the purse strings. And we look at those contracts, and I'm so glad that that point was raised, because we see the same loss of revenue in the music business. I'm of a certain age. I don't believe any of the streaming. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I don't want my colleagues at Paramount to jump on me, but I used to have to go and buy Jay-Z's album. I would get up on a Tuesday and buy Janet Jackson. And when it said they sold 5 million records, 5 million albums, someone had a physical copy as evidence, and you paid your money. So this technological advancement has really dried up an income stream in all entertainment sectors. And I think it's crucial for us to really, as Black creatives and writers, to really add those pieces. If we can negotiate whenever we have contracts, we need to be looking at those numbers. We need to make sure we are getting the revenue from those numbers to make sure we can level the playing field.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like, when I looked at that article or those articles around those, it's about making sure that AI doesn't become the replacement, and it's more used as a tool for
I
writers.
think that's key. It's a tool, not a replacement for human touch, because even human error has creative tangibility in it. Some of the greatest mistakes we love in music are some of the greatest notes, some of the greatest songs that Stevie Wonder played. AI could never do that. So we don't want to see it as a replacement, but a tool to further our productivity and help us to see how we can further our income streams.
No, that's great. Thank you. Dr. McNealy, so while the Hollywood writers negotiated how AI could be used in the field or in their field, just last week, President Biden, continuing on this idea of regulation, he signed an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. And so we've talked about a couple of things in our conversation, how AI can benefit and harm our communities, and second, how AI can enhance or hinder the work of Black writers and creatives. I'll talk a little bit generally about the executive order, but then transition to what are some of the critical implications for Black communities and even more so Black writers based on the outcomes of that executive order.
Yeah, so I was happy that there was an executive order, but I want to make sure that everyone knows what an executive order actually is. It's not legislation. It's not law in the traditional sense. It is a directive from the president to the federal agencies, the executive agencies, like, hey, this is the really important thing I want you to be looking at right now and provide us with guidance so we can then try to lobby Congress to do something, maybe if Congress decides to get on the boat sometime soon. But it is not law. And Congress can actually pass law that will make it really hard for an executive order to come into fruition, so to speak. But this is a very kind of comprehensive executive order. It leaves certain things out, but there are really important things that I think we could talk about that are really important for us in this conversation. Basically, the executive order says we want AI. We don't want to cut it off. We don't want to ban it. We want it to be safe and secure. We want people to be safe and secure in using this. And we want the organizations, including federal organizations, but corporate organizations that are using the tools and creating the tools and deploying those tools to be using it in a way that is not harmful and not harmful to particular communities. And in this, the executive order expressly states that they want to make sure that AI is being used with the consideration of equity and justice. And that was also part of its blueprint for AI Bill of Rights that came out last year as well. So equity and justice, particularly getting feedback from communities and includes us, is a very important part. Another important part for us is privacy and the privacy of sensitive information. We know that writers and all kinds of people use all different kinds of systems. Privacy is paramount. Do you want to publish something anonymously? Do you want to publish something without leaving a trail? This is some of the things that the executive order asks that the other executive agencies look at as far as the collection of personal data of individuals and how that data might be used. And another thing I think that might be really important for creatives like the folks here are the parts of the executive order that focus on IP or intellectual property. In fact, the executive order President Biden asked the Copyright Office to provide recommendations for how it can move forward with respect to the things that are going to come down the pike with people creating things using artificial intelligence. I will tell you right now, currently, the Copyright Office will not provide a copyright for things made exclusively by AI. They have said no. There's been court cases and there's been guidance published where the Copyright Office has said, there's nothing, no, there's no human in this. And so, no, we will not offer you a copyright. But it's also important when you think about how these LLMs, these large language models, are writing with respect to the, I will say, collective use of a lot of different people's works and then publishing it. There's people who are attempting to submit to magazines now using LLMs that are not even going through their submissions to make sure it doesn't say, hi, I'm an LLM, but I'm submitting this work, but also artwork that people have created using LLMs that are based on the works of other folks. And there is copyright questions related to that. Now, we know that remix can be really good, but we also know that permission in remix is very important. So these are things that are coming up in the executive order I think are important for us. There are a lot of other things. It's actually a really long executive order, but those are the things that I picked that I think are important for this conversation.
No, that's great. And I particularly appreciate you talking about the executive order as a benchmark. It's another type of set of guidelines. And so it's this document that's allowing us, I think, as citizens, to be able to lean in and say, here's where we want to chime in about these issues that impact our communities, and we can reach out, to our elected officials and be able to talk about those issues. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So let me transition to Carlos. Let's start to talk about some of these opportunities. We're navigating this, quote unquote, brave new world of AI. Let's talk about some of those things that are exciting and available for us as Black writers. What are some of those tools that can be helpful? Do you think Black writers should be involved? I think you mentioned that already. And if so, how do you do that if you don't have a computer science background or you don't have any tech experience?
Right. I think that the opportunities for writers are not just to create content, but because a lot of writers, use the business of writing, right? And so this is where you can use AI to leverage those kinds of things in your profession, in your business. So things like some of the administrative tasks that you have to do, some of the research that you have to do. There are plenty of opportunities for those lower level tasks that you can do that will help you kind of move your business forward in the business of writing. As far as things like tools, I'm a big fan of OpenAI and ChatGPT because I've been using it quite a bit. Actually, I used it to try to prepare for this panel. And the way that I did that is that I have ChatGPT on my phone and I just gave it instructions to say, hey, I'm on this panel. I want you to ask me some questions related to this topic. And then I will give you my answer. And then I want feedback on this answer. And then the whole thing is transcribed. So it was great experience. As a writer, you may need to flesh out backstories or research. And the thing is to be able to have a tool that you can have this very deep conversation with that can also refer back to other kinds of things is really, really powerful. So don't look at it as a tool to replace what it is you do. Look at it to replace the thing that doesn't provide as much value to your business. One thing I will say that's related is that I think that when you build something like a following or an audience, you want to be careful about where you do that. Because if you stay with a certain platform, and I see this all the time in tech, the platform owner changes the rules and your business is no longer viable. So as much as you can, and AI will help you do that, how do you own your audience, so to speak, right? So trying to keep that in mind as you selecting tools and places to engage and all of that as well. The last thing is just that I think that if you start slowly, start with the things that make sense for you, and then as you use it, you will find other opportunities to do that and have conversations, find out what your peers are doing, because it will give you ideas on how to keep growing using these things and not reinventing the wheel, such as doing things as how to use a tool specifically to circumvent the bias that are inherent for it. As far as having programming background or computer science background, just a couple of days ago, OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, had their Open Dev Day conference. And one of the things they announced was for just individuals, regular people, to be able to create their own personal chatbot based on their own knowledge bases, their own skill sets. And you don't need to code. All you need to do is talk to it or write what it is you want, and that's how you get started. So I would say that um, not having a tech background is an advantage when you're using something like ChatGPT because it is not really a computational mathematical engine. It's really a semantic engine. And when you think of semantics, you think of language arts. And that's where this audience has their power. So don't be afraid of it. Use it incrementally. And I think that more opportunities will come and you will grow because of it.
Well, that's great. You gave us a whole bunch of stuff to think about. I mean, the first thing I thought of is we all know time is money. And so I like that idea of just AI helping you do some stuff so you can get to the work that you really want to do. And then I didn't even think about things like backstory, right? How to use AI to help craft all of that. Just lots of great nuggets that you shared. So I want to transition to Rashad. Black writers, there's just a lot going on that's impacting us. A lot of threats, lots of trends. So there's things like book banning and censorship. There's underrepresentation. They just came out with an article about the increased corporatization of literary publishing, right? And all of this is impacting us as Black writers. In addition, we're thinking about AI, right? And who's going to have the creative voice and who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. What are some ways that we can continue to communicate our value? I'm thinking especially, I thought of this question when, you're pitching. I mean, it's really impressive to see the work that you've done. So how do you constantly make sure you communicate your value as a writer, and how might some of that experience that you've had be helpful for us here today?
Well, to piggyback, and thank you for your kind words, Mr. Carlos talked about owning that audience and really honing in on that. I think of that in a business, from a business perspective and a writer perspective, really zeroing in on now we have a direct to consumer economy and society. Now that's the helpful part of AI. Now I can gather info and figure out who reads this tea I'm writing, who loves the storylines of sports, who loves feminist and womanist writings. Now I can really tailor my audience and get my writing, my newsletters, my books that's coming out, and really be ahead of the game way more than scholars and writers years past could ever dream of. So I would say honing in on that audience, honing in on using AI to make us more productive. Some of us who went to school and had the right thesis and dissertation, can you imagine we'd had AI helping us do a lot of that stuff? I wouldn't have lied on half of those bibliographies about those books I read, allegedly. if I had that kind of tech that would help me do that research. So I think limiting those kind of menial writing tasks and using AI to really help us hone our voice and hone in on our audience specifically. Because I see writing just how musicians today, they hone in on the audience, these independent, like a Tyler the Creator. I was in New York and I watched him sell out Madison Square Garden without a flyer. he has delivered his music and his uh his flair and his persona to his audience, those 17,000 people that's there. If we can grab a little bit of that as writers to really know, I'm not looking for you. This is not for you book banners. I'm not. You're not in my target audience. So how can I figure out a way to really find that audience and really speak to them, and use AI not only to find, but to develop and cultivate and grow that audience as well.
I love that. Really, this moment allows us to streamline who we're talking to, right? Really appreciate your comments there. And I also appreciate your confession about all these papers, and and this is a helpful point, right? That confession is helpful because I want to talk about ethics. Dr. McNealy, talk to us about ethical considerations. What are some of the significant ethical concerns we should consider as we engage AI tools? How can we protect our privacy, right? I think that's important, and ensure that we protect the privacy of others as we're using the tools. And then what I'll do is I'll piggyback and have one more question. Carlos can follow up and talk about, we probably have some parents and some educators and folks who work with youth. What are some important things we should be able to communicate to them about AI? Because they come into the world with tech already, at their disposal, at their fingertips. So let's begin with Dr. McNealy, and then we'll transition to Carlos. And please get those questions ready because we're going to turn to the audience.
Yeah, so I think one of the number one things we have to do is think about what it is we're doing when we're using a system. I mean, there's some systems that we have now that are just really great tools. They help us get the things done very quickly, efficiently, but we really need to know, like, what is happening with the system, like what is going on. It'd be really important to know that. Is the system built upon the labor of other people that aren't compensated without their permission? Is the system built on the works of other people without their permission, without their compensation, and pushing back against them when they say, hey, why are you using my work without my permission and without compensation? So really understanding what it is that we're doing when we're using a system, I think, is really important. And then we can make better choices about continuing to use the system, how we use the system. So as both my co-panelists, Carlos and Rashad, have said, there's some really good ways to use these systems to make things happen for the business side, the content side, for efficiency sake, all of that good stuff. At the same time, we have to be responsible for the systems that we're using, and we have to follow up on those systems as well. I'll give you an example. Lawyers have attempted to use things like ChatGPT. Help me write this brief. I have to submit this to the court. Time is an important thing. But if I submit that to the court and ChatGPT has made stuff up and I haven't checked to make sure that citation actually exists, that court case actually exists, I will look stupid. I also might get checked by the judge in front of everybody. And this has actually happened. So I'm not making it up. So there are flaws in every system. There's flaws in human systems. There's flaws in automated systems as well. So being ethical means understanding what's happening, but also being accountable for what happens as well, for the products it makes, and making sure that we as users of a system are taking responsibility. That means checking things up. That means making sure that we're using it correctly and we understand what's going on in the background of the system.
Carlos, you want to chime in?
Yeah, Dr. McNealy said something earlier when we were talking about using AI in education, and she said, always humans in the loop, and I love it. Being a tech guy, you would think that we'll just sign my child up for this online course and let them take it and hands off and all that kind of stuff. Definitely doesn't work that way. AI is not going to replace teachers. AI is not going to replace parents. And the reason is because for kids to grow, they need relationships. and a healthy relationship. And AI is definitely not a replacement for that. And something Rashad said earlier about further the thriving of Black people. I like that one too. This has been a great night. So, and it is that as a parent and as a role model for children, not just my own children, right? That you want to not teach them how to use these tools, but teach them to critically think about how to use these tools. That's just a subtle difference. I know that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, being in high school, there are industries now, jobs and careers now that did not exist back then. And we had no idea what was coming. Now imagine, I have a 10-year-old. Imagine a 10-year-old now when they're in the prime of their working career. What will she be doing then? How can I prepare her and prepare our children for a future that I can't see? And so you have to give them the ability to do this critical thinking. And AI is a way to help you come up with things, at least for our family, to come up with ways to kind of to do that. And so they will take what we've done to say, let's use these tools, but let's ask these hard questions. Let's try to answer some of these kinds of things. Let's not be afraid of this technology and leverage it. People of color have always navigated systems that have been biased against them. This is just one more that we're going to have to deal with. And I believe very strongly in that. And so it requires us to be engaged because that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward.
I think both Jasmine and Carlos talk about responsibility, right? That we are a part of this community, and we need to be mindful and respectful when we work on AI for ourselves and when we talk to our children. This is really important. I just want to transition to a few questions. Please keep on putting those questions in the chat. Isaiah wanted to know, do you have any tips, resources for keeping ourselves and our loved ones safe from harmful tech, surveillance tech, extractive practices of data collection, etc.? Anybody want to jump in?
There's a really great community-based guidebook that came out a few years ago, I think in like 2018, 2019, called Our Data Bodies. And it was created by a community group of folks, I believe, around the North Carolina area. But it goes over like what are the many different kinds of ways that we are datafied. That means like we are surveilled and made into data, and how that happens and what it means. And it doesn't name every different kind of possible technology, but it does give you ways to think about technology and the kinds of data it collects to offer you whatever it is it offers you, right? And so I think that's a really great guidebook. And also the spin-offs of that, like it'll connect you to the organization. And thank you, Denise, for putting that in the chat. So that's a really good guide, I think, as well.
Wonderful.
If I can jump in, I think
Okay,
that
go
just
ahead.
to add a story that kind of teaching your kids to make them aware that they are being marketed to. My youngest had downloaded a game on an iPad or something, and it had all these extra packs that you could buy. And I told her, I said, they just want you to keep buying these packs. So let's, as a math exercise, let's add up the cost of all these packs to see what would it be. And it was over $1,000. And she did a whoa. And she stopped asking because then she realized that all it is being marketed to you to try to get her to spend more money. So even though it's hard to know that you're being tracked and your privacy being violated, I think that it's important to know that that is happening and to try to just be more mindful and aware of it, especially when we're talking to our kids, because there's so much targeting towards them.
Yeah, Denise says critical media literacy is really helpful. Thanks for sharing those sources in the chat. I just want to know, do we have opportunity for one more question? Just really quickly, because we're almost out of time.
Can I ask the
Yes,
question?
yes, go ahead.
I was trying to type it, but it's a little long. So one of you guys said, and I completely forgot because all of you guys were saying so much intellectual stuff. One of you guys touched on how technology in itself is kind of inherently like racist, whether it's through the fact that it was like created in a form of bias, or even thinking about how you're typing something on Google Docs and like you spell a word incorrectly and it underlines it. And how it has that immediate kind of grammar mistake thing that goes into it. I guess I'm trying to like step into the authenticity of writers, and how like seeing stuff like that, or like even stuff like Grammarly where it tries to like completely misinterpret or correct what you're trying to say as a writer, how that can affect you getting your own authenticity across and your point across in general, and how like English literature in itself can also be looked at as inherently racist in the sense of like how us Black folk have created our own ways of speaking, like when we think about AAV or Ebonics, and how we can implement that into our kind of writing. I guess I'm just trying to like really unclothe how I feel like AI in itself can completely distort the Black voice in a way where like we're trying to actually like be as authentically Black and stray away from anything that is artificially intelligent, anything that's like trying to correct our style of speaking or our voice or anything like that. Does that make any sense?
And unfortunately, we probably only have about a minute left, a minute or two. So if anybody wants to chime in really quickly before we wrap up, and please, panelists, put your social media handles in the chat so that folks, if they want to talk to you offline or reach out to you offline, they can go ahead and do that. So anybody want to chime in about Zian? Is that how I say your name?
Zion.
Zion?
Yeah.
Question?
Just from a tech standpoint, turn the tool off. I turn Grammarly off quite often when I'm coding. So that was the thing that just kind of popped in my mind while you're doing that specific task.
Great.
I would say this
Yeah.
one aspect of Grammarly I like is add into the dictionary. That means you can control the narrative of what you write. So Ray Parker said when he's writing Ghostbusters, he was with a English guy, and it was like, how do you say that? I'm not afraid of any ghosts. He said, no, it's I ain't afraid of no ghost. See, sometimes you gotta treat your Grammarly like that. You gotta put some soul in your linguists.
I love it. And with that, we have to end. Thank you so much to our panelists, especially for putting your social media handles. I want to thank you for putting your social media handles in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to them. Our panelists again, Carlos Birdsong, Dr. Jasmine E. McNealy, Rashard Grove. Thank you for joining us. It was such an enriching and insightful conversation. I just want to say thank you to Hurston Wright for creating the space for these important conversations for Black writers, from the executive director, Khadijah Ali Coleman, for her leadership, DeAndrea Johnson, who's doing all things wonderful in the chat and getting this all ready tonight, the writing and programs manager, as well as Molly Rufus. Thank you to our audience for your attendance and for all of your great questions. Please continue to check out all that Hurston Wright has to offer, including upcoming events, by visiting Hurston Wright Foundation's website at hurstonwright.org. Finally, I hope that you will consider making a financial donation to Hurston Wright. Your donations help continue the amazing work of this organization. And I also want to say thank you to our current donors. Thank you to all, and I wish everybody peace and blessings. Let's continue to hold each other up and keep our creative fires burning. Have a good night, everybody. See you soon.